Todd Stermer's charred body was pulled from the ashes of his burning home, but investigators would soon uncover that the fire wasn't just a tragedy. It was the final chapter in a story of secrets, betrayal, and a deadly plan gone wrong. The town of Pine Ridge was the kind of place people passed through without a second glance. Surrounded by endless rows of pine trees and a single winding highway, it had always carried the reputation of being safe, quiet, and unremarkable. Families grew up here. Children played on the same fields their parents once did, and neighbors waved to each other across their driveways as if time itself had slowed down in this corner of the world. Nothing much happened in Pine Ridge, and perhaps that was why the tragedy that struck one winter morning felt so surreal, so out of place, that the entire community found itself unable to look away. It was early January, when the snow was still piled high on rooftops and the breath of morning air cut like glass. At the edge of town, where the road curved into the woods, smoke began to rise. Dark, heavy and unnatural against the pale winter sky, it twisted upwards in thick columns. A passerby was the first to notice it, pulling to the side of the road and calling for help. By the time the fire trucks roared down the icy streets, the Stermer residence was already consumed in flames. Firefighters battled the blaze with everything they had. The house crackled and popped as beams gave way, glass shattered, and sparks shot into the cold air. Neighbors stood at a distance, their faces lit by the angry glow of the fire, whispering in disbelief. This was Todd Stermer's home, the man they saw at the grocery store, the father who cheered at his kids' soccer games, the neighbor who always waved from his truck. Everyone knew Todd, everyone knew his family. To watch his house collapse into glowing embers felt like a nightmare unfolding in real life. When the flames were finally subdued and the blackened remains of the house were left smoldering, investigators moved in. It didn't take long for them to find what they feared most. Amid the ash and charred ruins, they discovered Todd Stermer's body. He had not escaped. His remains, burned almost beyond recognition, were carefully removed while the silence of the watching crowd grew heavier. It was assumed at first that Todd had simply been trapped inside, a cruel twist of fate, the kind of accident that could happen to anyone. But even in those first hours, certain things did not sit right. The fire had spread too quickly, moving with an intensity unusual for an ordinary electrical mishap. Some firefighters, seasoned from years of battling blazes, whispered among themselves that the pattern of the flames seemed strange. And then there was the way Todd had been found, in a part of the house that raised questions no one yet wanted to voice aloud. The news spread through Pine Ridge in waves. By nightfall, everyone knew about the fire. They spoke of it in hushed tones in diners, over fences, and in church basements. A man who had seemed rooted in their community was suddenly gone, and the way he had died felt far from ordinary. Something about the tragedy unsettled people, like an itch beneath the skin. What had really happened inside that house before it went up in flames? Todd Stermer had always been described as dependable, the sort of man who built his life with steady hands and careful steps. To most, he was the image of responsibility, a father who worked tirelessly to provide for his family, a husband who appeared devoted, and a neighbor who never hesitated to lend a tool or offer help. But as investigators began looking deeper into his life, a far more complicated picture emerged, one layered with hidden struggles and secrets that few in Pine Ridge had ever suspected. Todd's construction business had been successful at one point, bringing him steady contracts and respect in the community. But over time, things began to change. Work slowed, bills piled up, and Todd found himself dipping into loans that he could not easily repay. Those closest to him claimed he never spoke openly about his financial worries, yet bank records revealed a growing tide of debt that threatened to pull him under. Creditors had started pressing, and Todd had quietly mortgaged more than one property to stay afloat. What looked like stability from the outside was, in truth, a carefully balanced facade. The tension was not limited to finances. Within the Stermer household, Cracks had been forming in his marriage. Arguments had become more frequent, centered around money, long working hours, and suspicions of dishonesty. Friends recalled noticing the distance between Todd and his wife, Melissa, though few thought it serious enough to end in anything but reconciliation. Still, the strain was undeniable, and investigators began to wonder how deep those marital conflicts truly ran. As if financial strain and marital discord were not enough, another discovery shifted the tone of the investigation. Only a few months before the fire, Todd had taken out a significant life insurance policy. The payout was large enough to erase debts, provide security for his family, and offer a fresh start for anyone who might benefit. On paper, it was a responsible decision, a man making sure his loved ones would be cared for if anything ever happened to him. But in the shadow of his sudden death, it raised a far darker question. Was this foresight, or was it a motive for murder? Investigators could not ignore the timing. The policy was new, the debts were mounting, and his relationship with Melissa was under pressure. The possibility that Todd's death was more than a tragic accident became harder to dismiss. Each fact uncovered layered suspicion over the once simple story of a man lost in a fire. The community, too, began to see Todd differently. Whispers of financial troubles spread, followed by speculation about his marriage and what might have been going on behind closed doors. To some, it felt impossible to reconcile the Todd they knew with the man being described in the investigation. To others, it explained what their instincts had already told them, that the blaze was no random misfortune. Every detail seemed to push the case further from tragedy and closer to deliberate design. And though no one yet knew where that trail would lead, one thing was becoming clear. Todd Stermer's life had not been as simple or as steady as the people of Pine Ridge had believed. When the smoke cleared and the charred remains of Todd Stermer's home were finally cool enough to examine, investigators moved carefully through the wreckage. Every step they took stirred up soot and ash, the remnants of a life that had gone up in flames. To the untrained eye, it looked like a simple tragedy, a fire that had claimed the life of an unlucky man. But those trained to read the language of burn marks, scorched walls, and patterns left by flames quickly realized that this story was not nearly so straightforward. The first sign that something was wrong came from the way the fire had moved. Fires caused by faulty wiring or accidents usually have a traceable origin, a spot where the flames first sparked before spreading outward. But here, the burn patterns didn't follow that natural path. Instead, investigators noted multiple points of origin, areas where the fire had clearly started in more than one place. That detail alone was alarming. Accidental fires rarely behave like that. Samples collected from the debris were sent for testing, and the results confirmed suspicions. Traces of accelerant were found in key areas of the house, including the living room where Todd's body was discovered. This was not a random accident. It was a fire that someone had deliberately set, fueled by substances meant to make it burn hotter and faster. Whoever had done this wanted to ensure that the blaze destroyed everything in its path. The condition of Todd's body added another disturbing layer. Though badly burned, examiners were able to determine injuries inconsistent with fire alone. He had blunt force trauma to the head, a wound that could not be explained by falling debris or collapsing beams. It was an injury that suggested violence before the fire even began. This detail shifted the investigation entirely. Todd had not simply been caught in a fire, he had been attacked. Forensic experts also noted his position in the house. He was found on the floor near the back of the living room, not near an exit where one might expect to find a victim trying to escape. The location suggested he had been incapacitated before the flames spread, unable to flee or even cry out for help. That fact unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. As these findings were revealed, the atmosphere in Pine Ridge grew tense. The death of a well-known community member was tragic enough, but the possibility of murder within their quiet town was something no one wanted to believe. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Someone had struck Todd, left him helpless, and then lit the fire that consumed his home. Attention turned to who could have carried out such an act, and why. The life insurance policy surfaced again as a detail impossible to ignore. Financial strain, marital issues, and the potential payout made the people closest to Todd the natural focus. But questions still lingered. Was this the work of someone he trusted, or an enemy no one yet suspected? The ashes of the Stermer home held only fragments of answers, but those fragments pointed in one chilling direction. This was not fate or misfortune. It was murder, carefully staged to look like tragedy, and someone in Pine Ridge knew the truth. With the confirmation that Todd Stermer's death was not an accident but the result of foul play, investigators began piecing together the tangled threads of his personal life. The focus naturally fell on those closest to him, starting with Melissa, his wife of nearly 2 decades. On the surface, she had always appeared devoted, standing beside him at community events, smiling for family photos, and raising their children together. Yet behind closed doors, investigators found signs of resentment and exhaustion that painted a much different picture. Melissa told police she had been away at her sister A.'s house on the night of the fire, a claim that initially seemed to shield her from suspicion. But inconsistencies in her story quickly emerged. She struggled to remember exact times, and phone records showed calls and messages that placed her closer to home than she admitted. Surveillance cameras from a nearby gas station captured a vehicle strikingly similar to hers passing near the Stermer home just hours before the fire broke out. Each new piece of information weakened the foundation of her alibi. The financial motive added weight to the suspicions. Melissa was deeply entangled in debt, with overdue bills and maxed-out credit accounts surfacing in the investigation. The life insurance policy taken out shortly before Todd's death had her listed as the primary beneficiary, promising enough money to not only cover her obligations, but also provide a fresh start. Investigators began to consider whether the blaze that killed Todd was less about rage or revenge and more about financial desperation. But Melissa was not the only person of interest. As detectives dug further, they discovered that Todd's business life had also been strained. A partner named Ray emerged as another potential suspect. He and Todd had been locked in a bitter dispute over money, with accusations of dishonesty and unpaid debts poisoning their once solid partnership. Ray had publicly threatened to cut ties with Todd, and several acquaintances recalled hearing him express his anger openly. For investigators, this provided motive and opportunity. Yet Ray presented a strong alibi. On the night of the fire, he had been at a crowded bar across town. Witnesses and security footage confirmed his presence, effectively removing him from suspicion. Still, the discovery of his conflict with Todd added a layer of intrigue. If Ray wasn't responsible, had someone else been acting on his behalf, or did Todd have more enemies than anyone realized? Meanwhile, forensic accountants uncovered that Melissa had been making unusual financial moves in the weeks leading up to the fire. Large withdrawals, hidden credit activity, and quiet inquiries into the insurance policy suggested preparation for something bigger. To investigators, this pattern looked less like coincidence and more like planning. As evidence mounted, the image of a devoted wife began to fracture. What once looked like tragedy began to resemble betrayal. The quiet streets of Pine Ridge, normally so free of scandal, buzzed with speculation. Friends whispered that Melissa had seemed strangely composed at the funeral, too calm for a grieving widow. Others wondered whether Todd's business troubles had driven someone entirely different to strike. The case was no longer about whether Todd Stermer had been murdered, but who among the people he trusted most had wanted him gone badly enough to plan it. And as suspicion circled tighter around Melissa, investigators felt certain they were closing in on the truth. As investigators prepared their case against Melissa Stermer, convinced they had uncovered both motive and opportunity, a startling discovery shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Hidden beneath the seat of Todd's old pickup truck, which had been spared from the fire because it was parked at a neighbor's, officers found a battered notebook. Its cover was half torn, its pages singed at the edges as if someone had tried but failed to destroy it. Inside, in Todd's own handwriting, was a series of entries that cast everything in a new and troubling light. The notebook revealed that Todd had been planning something extraordinary. He wrote about his debts, the crushing pressure of his failing business, and the despair of feeling trapped with no way out. The entries detailed an elaborate plan to fake his own death, with the fire as the centerpiece. His life insurance policy, taken out only months earlier, would pay out to Melissa and secure the family financially. In exchange, Todd intended to disappear, leaving Pine Ridge and starting over under a new identity. He described an accomplice, someone he trusted to help him vanish once the fire was underway. At first, investigators struggled to believe it. The idea that Todd had staged the disaster that ultimately killed him seemed unbelievable. But the more they read, the more the plan became clear. He had written about stockpiling supplies, researching ways to stage a convincing scene, and even hinted at a timeline that matched the night of the blaze. His notes painted a picture of a man desperate enough to gamble everything on one final escape. The most disturbing detail came in the final pages, where Todd admitted his fears. He had grown uneasy about the accomplice he had chosen, writing cryptically about trust and betrayal. The notebook ended abruptly, the last entry unfinished, as if he had been interrupted. This revelation changed everything. Todd had not simply been a victim of his wife's greed, nor merely caught in a tragic accident. He had orchestrated the fire himself, but been double-crossed before he could follow through. The autopsy findings now took on new meaning. The blunt force trauma to his head suggested the accomplice had turned on him, striking him down and leaving him to die in the very fire he had lit. It was a chilling irony. Todd's scheme to secure his family, as future had instead become the stage for his own murder. Melissa, once the prime suspect, was suddenly recast in a different light. While her financial troubles remained suspicious, there was no direct evidence linking her to the betrayal Todd had described. She may have known nothing of his plan until after his death, or she may have suspected more than she admitted, but investigators could not prove her involvement in the final act. The mysterious accomplice, however, remained unidentified. Despite exhaustive efforts, no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no financial trail revealed who had helped Todd set his plan in motion and then left him to die. Some believed Melissa knew the identity and kept silent to protect herself. Others suspected one of Todd's business associates, someone with both the knowledge and the opportunity to exploit his desperation. In the end, the truth of what happened that night remained hidden in the smoke and ashes. Todd Stermer's death was no longer viewed as a straightforward murder or a tragic accident, but as a web of deceit, desperation, and betrayal. Pine Ridge was left unsettled, haunted by the knowledge that the man they thought they knew had plotted his own vanishing act, only to fall victim to a darker twist than anyone could have imagined.